Tyler, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Kirby, thank you so much for having me, brother. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, buddy. I just for the listeners' sake, I connected with Tyler several weeks ago now, and after talking with him, I knew that this community would really benefit from hearing what he's up to. He's just for some background, he's the owner of LTG Investments, which provides support for an organization called Unbound Now, which is on a mission to stop human trafficking. And it's one of the biggest industries in the whole world. And so it's a huge mission. And Simon Sinek always talks about, starting with why. So if the size of your why dictates your success, Tyler is definitely going to be ultra successful. And he's already had a lot of great success doing what he's doing. And it's cool to see, real estate investing used as a tool to support such a worthy cause. So I want to go through and break down how you're doing it today and how someone else could potentially do something similar. So I'm really excited to have you here, buddy.
Yeah, no, I'm fired up for it, Kirby, and I really appreciate you giving me the platform and let me talk a little bit more about how we're trying to make it happen. So
absolutely. Yeah. So I guess if you want to start by maybe just going through your background and then how you decided on real estate as a tool to support such a huge mission.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself. I'm active duty Marine Corps, actually. So my day job, I'm actually an infantry officer. And kind of peeling back the onion a little bit, I went to the Naval Academy back in 2016 when I graduated. And commissioned into the Marine Corps and went and served in the infantry down in Camp Lejeune, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. And I always was really fascinated with real estate. And so that was something that I always thought was a great idea. And I think like a lot of military folks, the idea of buying a house, each duty station, keeping it, renting it out after I left, and then just kind of leapfrogging that throughout the whole process. As almost like an exit strategy, right, from the Marine Corps. I think that's a pretty stereotypical, just very lockstep. This is how we're going to do it. And then that'll give me some options when I get out. And so that's kind of what I did. I executed on that plan right after graduating from infantry officer course up in Quantico, Virginia, went down to Camp Lejeune, bought a house, and then packed it full of my buddies. And so I did the classic lieutenant mansion. Bought way too big of a house, put all my friends in it. Did you? Yeah, it's the best. It was so much fun. We were all a bunch of grunts living in the same house, and it was a blast. And we were all actually at the same unit too, which is really rare. They sent a dozen of us down to the same unit at the same time from the same course, and so
Nice.
That was a lot of fun. But so I bought that first property there, and then kind of just went about my way over the next 2 years, learning what is it like to be a homeowner. How is it collecting rent? What kind of stuff do you actually need to do in order to do that? And then I ended up getting married to my beautiful wife. And she, for some reason, I don't know why, Kirby, I don't know if you had to have run into this problem, but she didn't want to live in a frat house with 4 other guys.
And buzzkill.
Yeah, crazy, right? Like living expenses, they're so low. But we ended up buying a foreclosure in 5 minutes from that house. And we fixed that thing up and we moved into it right when we got married. And that was awesome. And that kind of brings me up to about 4 years into the Marine Corps. So kind of really slow, steady pace, just kind of acquiring stuff when I had time when it made sense. And then lo and behold, I got orders out to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And so kind of an obscure place, I feel like, if you're not familiar with the military, but it's basically a military grad school where the Marine Corps will send you there, you'll get a master's degree, and then you go ahead and you use that master's degree for the Department of Defense. And so moving out to Monterey, California, for folks that aren't familiar with the geography, that's about an hour south of San Francisco, hour and a half south of San Francisco. And so property values are high out here. And so what we originally were going to sell the lieutenant mansion and use those proceeds basically to help us purchase a house out here. But what we ended up doing when we were in the process of selling that 5-bedroom, 5.5 bath monstrosity that I definitely over rehabbed and learned a ton of things on that one. We realized that I had underestimated the ARV on the house that we live in flipped, because that was originally just going to be a long-term rental. And so we ended up selling both those properties when we moved out to California. And kind of a little bit more background on myself is I'm a Christian. So pretty much all of my stuff that I do, I try to filter through a faith-based lens. And so part of that lens is giving, right? And so we give a minimum of 10% of all of our income, whether it's the Marine Corps paycheck or real estate. And so when we sold those properties, my wife and I were trying to figure out where we wanted to give the real estate money to, because that wasn't a usual income, because we just kind of have our recurring donations set up through our paycheck. And that's something that's pretty regular. But with real estate, it kind of comes in leaps and spurts. And so my wife and I, we've been married for a long time, I think like 8 months at that point. And so we're really just kind of figuring out like what matters to us. What's a cause that we could get behind to start giving to out of real estate. And my mother-in-law, Susan Peter, she runs Unbound Now, which is the anti-human trafficking organization we kind of mentioned at the beginning. And so my wife suggested, hey, why don't we give to them? And I was pretty naive. I didn't really know anything about human trafficking, didn't know whether or not my mother-in-law was running this nonprofit like on a Facebook group or if it was like a corporate entity. I just knew that she did it, but didn't really know what it was. And so I was like, yeah, babe, that sounds great. And so we were able to give about $2,500 to Unbound. And I didn't think anything of it. And I kind of had this preconceived notion that you need to be some sort of millionaire, billionaire, philanthropist to make any sort of impact on charity. And so I kind of gave it, like we were happy to do it. It was nice. And didn't really think much of it. But then my mother-in-law called us and was like, Tyler, Lindsay, thank you guys so much. For $5,000, that's all it takes for us to fund a worker full-time in Mongolia who sits on the border between Mongolia and China. And all they do 365, 7 days a week is just snatch people that are being sold into slavery in China. And it's like, holy cow, when she said that, my mind was blown. And it was just one of those things where kind of opened my eyes to, you don't have to be a billionaire in order to make a difference. You truly can make a difference with smaller sums of money. And I'm kind of a nerd now too. So this master's program I'm in is like data science, like data analytics, like think spreadsheets on steroids. And so when she said it only took $5,000 to make a difference with their organization, it kind of set off my brain. I was like, you know what would if we flipped 2 houses a year? Then maybe we could give $5,000 a year away. It's like, okay, well, I mean, if you're going to do 2, you might as well do 3. And it was kind of like the give a mouse a cookie principle, where it's like, well, what if we just kind of launched into this and turned it into more of a business than just our exit strategy from the Marine Corps in 5 years? And so that's really what we did. And we launched LTG Investments, and we've been acquiring properties in Waco, Texas is where we're really focused on. That's where Unbound is founded. And that's just kind of the passion. So that's the genesis of why we decided to really do a professional business, like get your LLC set up, work with investors, get a lawyer on board, CPAs on board, and all that kind of stuff to more legitimize it, more so than just kind of acquiring one-off properties and that kind of a thing. And so that kind of brings us up to speed right now with where we're at. But
yeah, wow. And you said $5,000 funds a worker. Is that for a year?
Yeah, that's an entire salary for a year in countries like Mongolia. Wow. And so that, to give a little bit more background on Unbound as well, like they're not a small organization. Like this isn't my mother-in-law running it on her laptop out of a like garage somewhere, you know. They've got like a multi-million-dollar budget, and they're making a huge impact around the world. But they're just so good and efficient with their resources that they squeeze every last dollar out of everything that people give them. And so, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. To think about that. I mean, it seems like, like you said, like, you know, I think the perception is you got to be a big philanthropist to giving millions of dollars to make a difference. Because especially with something like human trafficking, I heard some stat that it's like bigger than like all professional sports combined. It's bigger than like massive industries that you pretty much any massive industry you can think of. It's like human trafficking is a bigger, black market industry than those in terms of how much money goes through this. And so to think like you're going to make much of a dent until you hear statistics like that, like $5,000. And like you said, like that's somebody who's, literally saving lives, like they're like daily. And so it's like, well, what's $5,000 going to do? Well, to those people whose lives were saved, it did a lot. Yeah. So that's amazing. And so what's the website for people to find out more about Unbound Now?
If it's simple, unboundnow.org. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I saw the website earlier, and it's pretty cool. And it explains a lot of what actual human trafficking is, which some of the details I didn't really understand until I read that. So if we can kind of get into how your business is set up, I worked at Bunker Labs for many years and was a big part of that organization as somebody who got a lot of value out of it, and then as a staff member. And one of the big things, so Bunker Labs is a nonprofit that helps vets start businesses. And one thing, especially in the veteran community, is that people want to start these mission-driven organizations. And so initially they get the entrepreneurial itch and they're like, I want to start a nonprofit. And immediately we kind of not steer them away from that, but help them to see you can do very worthy mission-driven organizations without necessarily being a 501c3 and becoming, basically a fundraising machine, because that's a big part of being a nonprofit. You can focus on your business and still give and make a huge impact. So how did you set up your business, and how do you recommend that somebody else might do something similar?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you like numbers and statistics, like the tithe is a great example of that, right? Like in Christianity, you're supposed to give 10% of your money to the church or worthy cause, or however you want to cut it. But when you look at that number, people typically invest about 30% of their income, right? And so if people are investors, if there's investors out there, they don't necessarily, maybe they'll give 10%, and that's a really big maybe, right? But they're going to invest 30% of their money. And so in my mind, having a for-profit business, like we take the need for the investors to donate like out of their hands. Like they don't have to donate to make a difference. They can still just make their money and take all of it home, because we're going to do that part. We're going to give no matter what happens. And so if you can unlock that 30% of income that gets invested, and because you're going to be the one who then controls it with the investment strategy you're using, you're able to really multiply your giving. And so our 10%, becomes much larger because you're now drawing from a bigger pot and you're able to access bigger deals and stuff like that. But the way we're doing it is, it's called a donor advised fund is the technical term for it. And there's really, really advantageous ways to give. It's called like non-capital gifts. And so what that means is, for real estate investors, one of the hardest things to do is be really charitable, right? Because you bought a house, you can't just like cut off 10% of that house and hand it over to somebody. But with a donor advised fund, you kind of can. And so you can donate ownership interest in a real estate deal. You can donate ownership interest in a business to your donor advised fund. And what's really interesting is that you immediately receive that tax benefit as if you had sold that interest, while you still retain that asset. So you still have control of that asset, but now the nonprofit has access to that equity basically. And then when you go to sell, it really streamlines the tax process and in a lot of different ways. And so we're really at the baby steps of it for our company personally. You have to have like a certain amount of assets, right, to be able to do it. And since we launched in January of this year, we are currently in the middle of 2 flips right now that don't necessarily meet like a capital stack like requirement basically to be able to really, really maximize the use of a donor advised fund. But we were fortunate enough to get brought in on a deal in Florida, which did kind of meet those capital requirements. And really our role in that deal was more just showing people how you could give to charity out of a deal like that. And the deal was like a 386 unit apartment complex. And so, I mean, when you're buying something that's $42 million worth of real estate, you can imagine the impact you can have for charity if you're doing something with a donor advised fund in that way. And so, hopefully that answers your question, but really a way that we're able to do it is through more tax advantaged giving of non-capital gifts. And the way we're doing it is a donor advised fund. So.
Got it. Okay. So, so just tactically then, basically what you're doing is assigning 10% of the equity or ownership of each deal that you do to the charity. So they come in as if they had invested 10% of the proceeds and got 10% of the ownership, or I'm sorry, 10% of the capital and got 10% of the ownership. So that way, when you do have proceeds, when you do get cash flow, or when you do sell it, that all goes back to them at that time.
Essentially, yes. And there's definitely some nuances. And like, I know you're a military guy. So like before you call an airstrike in, you're supposed to tell them that you're not a JTAC. Like I am not a CPA. Like this is not like accounting advice, right? So you need to talk to an accountant, and they've got great accountants. National Christian Foundation is the folks that we work with for the donor advised fund stuff.
Yeah.
But their accountants can do a great job of explaining all the nitty gritty details. If there's any other nerds out there like me that like want to know down to the penny, like what are the tax benefits and how does it actually work? But essentially what happens is our goal is to be able to build our business large enough to where right now we're just gifting the cash proceeds because we don't necessarily have that capital stack required to really donate the business interest. But eventually we're going to be donating the business interest in our LLC. So they'll own the donor advised fund itself will own 10% of our company. And then all cash flows pass directly into the donor advised fund, which is great when you start having payroll, when you have those kinds of things, because then that exempts it from all those different taxes, and it truly passes tax-free to the nonprofit, which is really, really crazy when you start talking higher numbers and larger amounts of cash flow and more transactions and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I never even had heard of that before, the donor advised fund. So it's cool to know that that's a possibility. And you can start, like you said, you can start on a small scale. Don't feel like you need to be like a multimillionaire buying 400 unit properties to get started. Like you started with a few flips, and just the concept still works on a small scale, even if you don't have all the legality, I guess, in place. But yeah, like you said, if a bomb drops on you, it's not our fault. So talk to your legal counsel first before setting it up. Can we walk through a couple of your deals then? So, I mean, you started with the Lieutenant Mansion, and then you rehabbed a house for yourself. Now you said you're into two flips. So maybe let's pick one deal that you'd like to highlight that you think would be, maybe it was one that was more challenging and you learned a lot from, or it was one that went really well.
Yeah, well, I mean, because we're in such startup mode, I think it would probably be beneficial for folks to understand how we actually broke into a market from a distance. Because I know there's a lot of folks that want to invest in real estate from a distance.
Yeah.
Especially in California. Oh yeah, especially in California. I mean, we bought the house I'm speaking from right now, but we got a great deal on it, VA loan, 0 down, and not a lot of folks have access to stuff like that. And so we really ran our head against a brick wall for about 3 months at the beginning of this thing, making multiple offers, getting beat out. They're all on the MLS, stuff like that. And so I'll go through one of the deals we have an active rehab on right now. But part of my degree, like I kind of mentioned beforehand, is data science. Basically, it's called operations research, but a lot of computer programming, which if you go back and talk to my buddies in college I played football with, and they would laugh at me saying Goble's doing computer programming. Like, what on earth is going on?
It's like an oxymoron for a Marine football player.
It is. Like, I got to take my shoes off to count to 20. So it's like one of those things that it was hilarious that they sent me this program. Months before, I was like, oh, it's going great, honestly, which is shocking because I never thought I would enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
I never thought I would really like programming and data on the scale that I'm doing it on.
Yeah.
But what we did starting in January, February timeframe is I actually developed an algorithm that takes data down from Realtor.com, Zillow, Rentometer, the Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, all these different websites that you see folks referencing all the time on LinkedIn and all these different places. And it pulls it down off those websites in real time. And then I've curated it to the point where I'm able to really hone in on the single family market and determine ARVs and determine what stuff's trading for. And so we were essentially using my code and using our realtor and contacts inside the market we're investing in to try and buy properties. And we were making offers. We probably made about a dozen offers, ran my real estate agent ragged down there, just trying to find something in the seller's market. And it just was, we just couldn't break in. We couldn't get something where it would pencil out. And that's when I realized that we really needed to bring a partner on board. And so what we did is we realized that, man, a smaller piece of a bigger pie is worth more than no piece of any pie. And right now we're getting no piece of any pie. And so what we were able to do is have a really good relationship with some folks down in Texas and brought them on board as 50-50 equity partners. And it was like someone turned the light switch on and it was boom. As soon as that happened, like their problem was they didn't have financing. I had access to some investor money and knew how to run the numbers. They were really skilled in project management and managing the rehabs, as well as physically located in our market. And so we had read up a little agreement, went 50-50 on these deals. And so as soon as that happened, it was like within a week, we had 2 properties under contract and really just kind of took off from there, and deal flows picked up significantly. So the one property we have right now, we closed on it like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And
you said these are both in Dallas?
It's Waco, Texas.
Oh, Waco. Okay.
South of Dallas.
Got it.
And so, but that was the big push. And I think it's like, as a numbers guy myself, right? Like I can see it on a spreadsheet, like 50% of a deal, like, man, that kind of hurts. But it took me a while to get to the realization that you're going to do a lot more with a partner in some cases than you are by yourself. Especially when you have another job, if you have another W-2 that you're working for. And so that was what kind of pushed us over the edge. Investing from a distance was finding somebody in that market that had a problem that we could solve, and then would also be able to solve the problem that we had, which was really just closing on these deals and doing the project management. So hopefully that answers your question. I think I danced around a little bit there, but.
No, that's great. I advocate for the same thing. I got out in 2011, got out of the Army, and my first deals were almost the exact same situation. It was, family and friends that I partnered with. And I said, hey, you guys provide the funding and I will do all the work. And I just basically, and I tell people this all the time who are like, how do I get started? How do I raise money? And it's like, I went out and found a deal that I was going to put an offer in on and created just like a 2-pager around, here's what I'm going to buy it for, here's what I'm going to sell it for, here's the before pictures, here's examples of what it will look like afterwards, even though I had never done a deal before, and created this whole profile around it as if I'm about to buy this property, and said, here's your expected returns. Nothing's guaranteed, obviously, but this is, what I'm shooting for. And I didn't get the deal, but I could use that then and say, okay, I didn't get this deal under contract, but I'm going to go out and find one just like it. You can see it's so much easier for people to visualize when they see it in front of them, and they can see like, instead of just talking concepts, like I'm going to buy and flip property. Well, what does that mean? Like, I want to see like physically what exactly you're going to do. How are you going to use the dollars I give you? And so we split the equity 50-50. I did all the work and they provided the funding, and very similar setup. And it got us going. And then as you scale, it's tough to have tons of different equity partners for flips. So we ended up switching mostly to just straight interest rate eventually with our private lenders. But it's a great way to get started. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you brought a great point up of like, you laid the groundwork before all this stuff happened so that you could actually move when a property presented itself, right? And so like the deal that I'm kind of referencing a little bit that we're rehabbing right now, it took us 3 hours to get 42 grand to fund it. Wow. Like, it was a very quick fund. Yeah. But the reason it was a quick fund is because I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone networking with folks for months beforehand. And so when it came to sending that opportunity out to our list, it went quickly. And that kind of brings up another thought is like, we're pretty generous on our terms with our private lenders, but the reason is because we know that those folks are good stewards of their capital as well, And so for us, it's like, man, if we can make them more money and we're still making money, like we have giving goals inside the company. We don't really have revenue goals. And so for us, what our goal is is to be able to give away $1 million a year in active income from the real estate business, and $100,000 a year in passive income, like living off rentals type stuff. And that's great, but it doesn't all have to come from us, right? So if we're 50-50 partners with like-minded folks, and they're also going to donate their money, then we just multiplied our giving again. And then if you can also bring in folks that are investing from a private lending perspective, that are going to be donating their money to not necessarily even Unbound, but just other good charitable causes, then the ripple effect that you can have is, I think, is a lot greater than when you kind of have a more of a narrow mindset of, I need to make as much money as I can because I'm the only one who can give it away. It's like, well, not necessarily. If you partner with the right folks that have the same kind of causes behind it, it really kind of mutually incentivizes everybody in the whole transaction.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I apologize. There's work being done on a porch on our house, and there might be a little bit of pounding back here. But that when you were explaining earlier about taking investors, and then you're set up to give 10%, so they're giving and still making their returns just because you're giving. But I was thinking at the same time, you're probably giving them back solid returns, and they're seeing what you're doing with the money, and it's incentivizing them to say, well, if you're giving 10%, maybe I should give 10% too. And so, like you said, there's a trickle down effect that probably wouldn't be there, like you wouldn't even have that conversation around giving if that wasn't part of your business. So when you talk about giving away $1 million, it seems like a pretty lofty goal, but when you're having the influence that you're having on different investors who are all making a great return, then, they'll probably want to do the same thing or contribute as well. So that's a great way to look at it. I get in the habit of looking through the lens that I need to get, do this stuff myself. And, but you can really do a lot if you're thinking through how could I scale this? How could I, do this as a team? So, that's awesome. Can we talk a little bit about those deals? So, what constitutes a deal for you? I'm always curious on this with different investors, because everybody's gauge for what a deal is different. So for you specifically, what made you pull the trigger on these?
So what we're looking for right now is, with our underwriting, we're looking to make at least 30 grand on a flip in the market we're in. And we're willing right now to squeeze it just a little bit because of the crazy appreciation we're seeing. Like I said, I'm a data guy, right? And so I'm seeing these numbers, and in the market we're investing in, it's like 175 available listings in a healthy market is around 1,000. And so they're seeing less than a month of inventory, and stuff is just flying off the shelves. And so
Chip and Joanne probably own half those. So
yeah, good old Magnolia. It's crazy. Like Magnolia, they single-handedly raised the property tax for just about everybody in Waco. It was a pretty big deal.
Or the price?
The tax, property tax. Because what happens is, when they reappraise properties in Texas every year, and so if the property value goes up, the main way Texas makes money is property tax. Yeah. And so there's no income tax, and so everybody's property taxes went up like overnight, and so there's a lot of people fighting appraisals there. But anyways,
wow.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But for us, a deal right now, if it's like a sub $300,000 kind of total cost, we're looking at about 30 grand, but there's a couple of deals that we're looking at where as that dollar number goes up, it's the classic risk adjusted returns, right? Like, we're not looking to spend more than like 300, 400 grand on properties without making around 40, 50 grand on those kinds.
So it's kind of like 10%. And is that, when you say make 30 grand, I've had different definitions of that. Yeah. Is it like 30 before you pay off your money? Is it 30 before you pay taxes? Is it like, there's a lot of versions of that? So is that like 30 net, or how do you determine that?
So that's 30 gross after we've paid all costs. So pay back our private lenders, pay them their return, pay back any sort of long costs, renovation loan, all that kind of stuff. And because of how we're structured, we're really hoping to not pay a whole lot of tax on those flips. Yeah. Because of the way we're kind of positioning ourselves, and so those are pre-tax numbers for sure. But
Okay. So then of that 30, then you could take $3,000 and give it to the charity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool. So how, from a remote standpoint, because like you said, a lot of people are interested in doing deals remotely. How do you, I mean, I guess what's your involvement? Do you rely solely on the boots on the ground? Are you actually managing any component of it, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I run all the comps. I do all the finance. I do any sort of like back office type paperwork things that need to be done. So I'll line up the financing. I do all the notary and all that kind of stuff. And then my partners on the ground are really heavy in the project management and then supervising the rehab. And my wife she's actually getting her master's degree right now in interior architecture. And so she does all the design work, computer CAD type stuff. It's crazy what she's able to do. And awesome. So she's like the design team and I'm like the nerd numbers guy, running literal code in the background to make sure that we're not like about to buy in when the market's turning. So that's something we've been keeping a really close eye on.
I see. Yeah. It's interesting how much of real estate investing can be done remotely. You think it's physical, like you're doing work to a hot property, especially with a flip, you're doing a lot of rehab work. But all the money could be run through somewhere else. I mean, banking is so remote now, all the design work, all that stuff. All you need is contractors to be on site, really. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. If you had advice, or if you could go back and start over again, knowing what you know now, would you set it up different? Is there anything you would change, or is there any advice that you have for somebody who's brand new looking to get started?
Yeah, it sounds super easy to say what I just said about running the numbers and being able to do the financing and doing all that stuff from a distance. And then, all they do is the project management and manage the rehab. But that's a big all they do. Like that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And the real issue is the market that we invest in, right? It's not a market where the contractors would probably appreciate getting a random email from a guy in California saying, hey, I'm investing in Waco. This is what I'm expecting. Send me pictures, that kind of thing. It's a lot more of a handshake type world. And so you really need to evaluate the market that you're wanting to invest in and see what kind of folks you're working with on the contractor side, where like my partner on the ground, he speaks fluent Spanish, which in Texas is a huge deal, right? And so that cultural thing is a real deal. Like it is a big part of it. Whereas if we're working in Michigan and it's majority English speaking contractors that are fine with me sending them a YouTube video that my realtor shot and doing a voiceover of the rehab, then you can do it there. But you need to have a partner on the ground who's as invested in that deal turning out right as you are. That's really what I think my biggest advice is. So I would have partnered up earlier. I would have reached out to the folks that we're working with down there sooner, because really me and my wife were the ones who were more invested than our contractors down there. And especially if you're breaking into a new market, because they don't know you from Adam, so it helps to be able to shake hands physically. And for all intents and purposes, our contractors in Texas probably don't know I exist, which is fine. It doesn't really matter to me. They know they work with our partners down there, and that's who they get instructions and follow up with. And that's totally fine with us.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's why it's such a challenge for rental property owners to find good property managers too, because that advice that you said, make sure you find someone who's as invested in the success of that project as you are, is very difficult to do, especially with property managers, because and that's like kind of one of the main remote people that a lot of rental properties hire, remote services, because a lot of times you're hiring a big company and your little property equates to like 0.5% of their overall revenue. And so how much are they going to give you 0.5% of their attention? You're probably not going to have a whole lot of success then. So Yeah, hiring people who, they're fully invested with you. And it's tough to do. You maybe find somebody newer who's hungry, who's building a business, and they want to partner with you. But that's always a challenge. So that's good advice there. I'm interested in the data science side. You said you basically built software to kind of analyze ARVs and figure out, number one, like what deals are available or what deals might be available, and then number two, you said you're monitoring the market for any market shifts. How does that work?
Yeah, it is amazing to me how much data is out there for free. So companies like Realtor, Zillow, Redfin has some data. I don't use their data very much, but my main sources are Realtor.com and Zillow, which is really good because it translates well for our private investors. Like they can understand those different terms. But essentially, what I've done is I've taken the data from Realtor.com, which they provide in like comma separated variables, it's like Excel spreadsheet type file. And what you do is I've written code that directly accesses it from their website, pulls it down into my computer, and then synthesizes it, grabs it, and takes it from the national to the state to the county to the zip code level of all the different metrics you could really ever want. I've got how many listings are on the market, how many of those listings are pending, how many are active, what the price per square foot, median price per square foot per listing in that zip code all the way up to national is, what the median price or median square footage is in that market. And so for us, when a deal comes up, I'm pretty dialed into the market I'm in now, but the grand scheme of things, we would love to be able to open ourselves up into multiple markets as we kind of get bigger and build a bigger capital base. And what it enables me to do is if you give me a zip code, I can pretty much do all the underwriting within 5 minutes for that specific place down to the county. And it gets a little bit unreliable at the zip code level because sometimes they don't report those very well. But at least at the county level, we can get a really, really clear picture of what the market's doing in that up to the last month. So the data lags by about a month. And so, yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And I think it's a really powerful way to know for sure that you're not buying something that is the outlier. And so we try to stay within that median price point and stay within that median square footage to where we're not buying, really replicating my mistake I made in North Carolina, where I bought a 3,200 square foot house and put 2 full bathrooms in it because I thought that'd be a great idea. Everyone's going to have their own bathroom. And it's like, who wants to buy a 5-bedroom, 5.5 bath house? Like, you're not going to get your money out of that as an investment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I wish I would have had this when I was flipping because, you run the numbers on a spreadsheet for a deal and you're like, oh, well, this should sell for X because these other deals that I did, which were much smaller, lower price point, different features, sold for these prices. And you realize real quickly that there's a much, much smaller buyer pool, like you mentioned, for, $1 million houses as there are for maybe, $300,000 houses in a area where $300,000 houses are what most people are buying. So, you really got to be tuned into what the averages are and where the biggest pool of buyers is so that you can just do what people are buying. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. So,
that's great.
That's
and
awesome.
Use terminology that people understand. It helps when you're talking to wholesalers when you have that much information at your hands, where a lot of times wholesalers will look at estimates like for individual homes, and that's what they're basing it off of. And it's like, that ain't even close. But what Zillow does is a really good job. They will break down their data to where all homes for those zip code county states, or 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom. And so kind of our filter goes down where it's like we're targeting 3 bedroom homes at this square footage. If we see something like a deal that's like, say the average price is 200,000 in that area, but we're seeing something that's listed for 100, then that trips the flare in your head. You go, okay, there might be a deal here. Let me do some further research and get into some other software. We've integrated PropStream and Renometer as well into the code to where that now also gets overlaid on top of what we're looking at. And that's where like, that's beyond the 5-minute point at that point. Then you're at like the 15-minute analysis of, okay, now I'm going to look at some sold comps to see if these numbers are backed up. But a lot of it too is like using numbers that people understand, especially when they're working with private lenders, because it doesn't do you any good if you're talking about calculus and they've only taken like geometry in high school, you know? So you got to speak at the level to where it makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the goal is to wash out all the garbage before you spend any time analyzing. Because if you try to just analyze everything that's thrown at you, that's all you'll do. So that's great. Is this software or ability available? I mean, are you going to be selling it, or I'm shocked that this like isn't a service out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, there are folks that pay for data like this that's curated. It's really expensive. And so I think there's a way where I'm really looking to incorporate like machine learning and artificial intelligence into it. And it's one of those classic things where I'm building the plane kind of on the way down right now, where I'm learning all this stuff in my program and then incorporating it as it happens. And so right now it's very, very like internal facing to where I know the right things to type into the code to make it work. Whereas if I were to just hand it off to somebody, they would break it in the first try.
Yeah.
And so I think down the road, it may be something we look to commercialize a little bit. But it is something that we provide in our newsletter for folks, where I will just give you the output for what the national like information looks like. And for other folks, like I'm in the War Room Mastermind, which is like a military real estate investment type deal. And folks will send me an address and I'll just run the code for them real quick, and in exchange for them just giving me feedback on what's more useful and whatnot. But right now it's just super internal to the business, just because I haven't spent any sort of money on it. It's all grassroots, me typing away on my laptop, which is still ridiculous that I'm even know how to computer code at this point. I spent 18 years of my life hitting people with my head in football. So I don't even know, but it's not something that's like commercially available right now.
Yeah. Well, I'll stay tuned, because I'm sure there's a market for that. So if it does, just make sure you let me know, and I can share that with the community. But the concept, though, I think is important for people to understand too. I think that's the takeaway here too, is like, figuring out ways to siphon through lots of data that's out there. Like you said, there's a lot of free data, and get down to what could potentially be a proper a deal, so that you can spend your time on that. I do that with off-market deals as well. I kind of filter them out when they first come in. I have somebody who looks at them first, and we eliminate the ones that just are retail deals. They aren't going to work, and just focus and maybe visit the ones that are potential, have a lot of potential for being a deal. So that's really cool. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time today. If people want to reach out and they have questions about LTG Investments or about Unbound Now, or just other questions about working with you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so I mean, Unbound Now, their website's unboundnow.org. That's a great way to get there. Our website is just ltginvestments.com, and so you can see a little bit of blurb there. And I'm on LinkedIn, so just Tyler Goble on LinkedIn, you can find me. And LTG Investments is our Instagram account as well. And then my personal email, if you want to email me directly, is just tyler@ltginvestments.com. So happy to chat with whoever. Love talking real estate, and especially if you are charity minded. That's really like, if I could draw up a perfect investor for us, it's somebody who wants to make money in real estate, but also wants to kind of have an impact behind their investments. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I know the community is going to get a lot out of this interview, and we'll definitely stay in touch. I want to have you back on, in the future, and hear hear about all the progress that you're making.
Yeah, thank you, Kirby. I really do appreciate you, brother, and thank you for letting us have the platform for a little bit. And it's super exciting seeing what you're doing, man. Like, I'm in that Facebook group, and there's some awesome stuff going on in there all the time. So
thanks.
It's really cool seeing you take off and how much you guys are crushing it. So
Thanks. Yeah, it's a cool community. I'm excited to be a part of this, and we'll see where it goes. So, yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks again, brother.
Yep. Appreciate you.